I'm so excited to be here with such great company. Chrysanthi Galou, thank you very much to yourself and the University of Nottingham team, Professor Hodgkinson, Professor Paul Cartledge, and all our friends and Ambassador Kate Smith for being here today to talk about Sparta and what Sparta meant for the whole world then and today. It indeed very exciting. When King Leonidas left with his 300 to go to battle at Thermopylae, he knew he was not going to come back to his home. And when his wife asked him, "What do you want me to do when you're away?" you know what he answered? He said, "Find a good Spartan and have some good kids." He knew he was not going to come back. And when some other Spartans asked him on his way out, "Aren't you just too few to fight the huge army of Xerxes?" he said, "For the purpose that I'm going for," meaning that I'm going to delay Xerxes' invasion and basically die there, "we're more than enough." So we're starting with the 2500 years, the celebration from that famous battle of Thermopylae, and we're going to be talking about a great number of subjects and aspects of Spartan life and Spartan civilization. Many people don't know that Sparta made some very unique contributions to the world. Most of them think that it was just a fighting machine. That was not the case. That was maybe the least of Sparta's contribution. Number one contribution, it was Sparta that initiated the concept of democracy and rule of democracy in the whole world, in the humanity. Sparta instituted democratic institutions 200 years before Athens under the time of Solon. 830 before Christ in Sparta, that all citizens had the right to vote, had the right to be elected, and they had the right to judge their leadership and call them to account, ask them what was going on. This was in Sparta 830 before Christ. It was in Sparta that for the first time in the history of the human race, you had the institution of a senate, a body that stood before the top authorities of the city and the public, the general public, and acted as a filter in the decisions of the general public. The general public had the ultimate say, but there were a number of filters that allowed the processes to be more cool rather than tempered by whatever was going on in the General Assembly. So the Senate, and we have a Senate in Italy, we have a Senate in the United States, we have a so-called Senate as with the House of Lords in the UK. These are all derived from Lycurgus' constitution. The idea of a constitutional monarchy, where you have not one but two kings keeping an eye on each other, that was also invented in Sparta, where you actually do have a king, two kings in this case, but they were not absolute monarchs. They were very accountable to the public and had rather limited powers other than being commanders-in-chief during the war. During the war, the kings were expected to be on the front fighting line, and that was a good and Spartan innovation and contribution. The conceptualization of the idea of income and economic equality. For the first time in the history of mankind, this lawmaker, Lycurgus, I think is the biggest lawmaker of all times, said that to have stability in the political system and in society, you need to have some economic equality and economic stability. So what he did when he formed his constitution and the new structure of Spartan society, he distributed the land of the Spartans in about 9,000 equal lots, so they could all start from an equal footing. So this idea was not conceived by Marx, it was conceived by Lycurgus. And this is another contribution to the global political thought. that comes and emanates from Sparta. And I will also add the idea of checks and balances. The system was so balanced that it lasted for over 600 years. The same system without internal revolutions. There were internal tensions, but not internal revolutions. Every king was succeeded normally by his son or somebody next of kin. There were no murderers and other upsets and different families coming to power. It was two families that lasted for 600 years and managed Sparta for 600 years. The Senate functioned continuously for 600 years without any major upsets. So, continuation, checks and balances, the first republican system ever. And many people are not sure what we mean by the term democratic or republican. The idea of republican means that everybody has a stake in his own affairs and the state affairs, which means that all social classes had a stake and a stability in the system. And more so, the richer would feel comfortable that the majority of the poor would not always outvote them and overtax them and confiscate the property. That was the basic idea, that the richer people would feel comfortable that the system was not going to systematically work against them. So you have a monarchy, that's a dual monarchy with limited powers. You have a Senate, you have the People's Assembly, you have these checks and balances. And after a number of decades, because it was not easy to manage the general assemblies of the people elected their 5 representatives who were the all-powerful Ethos. And these were the ones that managed the state's affairs much more strongly than the kings or the Senate. And they were the representatives of the people, so the people were satisfied that even though they didn't have to go and vote every day in the Appella, in the General Assembly, they had their own guys managing the affairs. And the final contribution, I would say, is the idea of Ethos, the idea of shame. And what do I mean by that? That people, the average person in Sparta, was embarrassed not to be up to the task. You were embarrassed as a warrior not to be good enough and let your fellow warriors down. You were a warrior and you didn't want your king to feel that you are not good enough. This idea that I have to excel myself because people expect me to do my best is that concept of ethos, which is very much neglected, but in Sparta it was quite high on their priorities. So yes, we have the first constitution that managed, because of that constitution, to get the best out of the Spartan people, who up to that time were of nomadic descent, not that important. And you have this guy, this lawmaker called Lycurgos, who finds the spots of the Spartans that needed to be taken upwards. And he managed to create this constitution that was complex, it had its checks and balances, it was republican in nature in that it allowed all classes of society to participate in the system. And because that system worked, that's why we have somebody like King Leonidas and his 300 warriors going to battle Xerxes. That idea of ethos, that I have to really be good for my country and I have to contribute to my country. And then when around 200 before Christ, rounding the figures, the Achaean general Philopoemen conquered Sparta, the first thing he did was to actually do away with Lycurgos' constitution. And the first thing he did in that respect was to abolish the free public schooling that Lycurgos has instituted for the Spartans. For the first time in history, we have a system of laws that said that all the kids of Sparta would get the same education under public supervision. And around 200 before Christ, when Sparta was conquered, quote unquote, for the first time, then the victors said, let's do away with this constitution, because it's this constitution that feeds Sparta's ambition. Do away with that and you do away with Sparta. But of course Spartans came back and reinstituted these institutions until the final submission to the Roman Republic and eventually to the Roman Empire. So Sparta and King Leonidas were a result of this superb constitution. Yes, we had problems, the helots, slavery, things of that sort, but let's try to see what the benefits of this system were, and let's see if there are lessons for us today. And I think Lycurgos Constitution is the prime constitution that we ought to look at and get lessons for ourselves when we have problems like the ones we're facing today. So again, Chrysanthi, Paul, Stephen, and all the team, thank you very much for being here with us. We will have a great number of subjects to talk in the near future. Ambassador Kate Smith, really nice seeing you again. I know you love our country. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much to all.